Ever feel like stepping into like a Dali painting, where everything's kind of melting and swirly?
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of what we're getting into today.
Yeah.
The world of hallucinations.
That's right.
It's
We're going deep.
it's wild. These things, people brush them off as like tricks of the mind,
Right.
but they've messed with people for like forever.
Centuries.
Yeah,
Yeah, they've been puzzling and captivating us.
totally. And our guidebook for this trip, excerpts from a German like academic dictionary all about hallucinations.
This is a serious resource.
Talk about a deep dive, right?
It is. It is. And, it's amazing how different cultures throughout time saw hallucinations.
Okay.
Back then, seeing visions, hearing voices,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
Maybe even like spiritual.
Whoa.
Right.
That's such a different take than now. It's like doctor, diagnosis, you know the drill.
Exactly.
Back then it was like, ooh, other realms.
Right. It really shows how we've come along in understanding like the brain, how we see things.
Totally.
Yeah.
And this whole shift, it makes me think of like absinthe,
Oh, yeah.
the green fairy, right?
Mhm.
I always thought it was so interesting, like all those artists and writers in the 1800s,
Yep.
totally obsessed with it.
Absolutely.
But there was a dark side.
Right. For sure.
Too much inspiration, maybe?
There was a dark side to that green fairy, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you got your anise, fennel, wormwood,
Yeah, potent stuff.
strong stuff. And it got a reputation
Oh,
for these crazy hallucinations.
intense.
Vivid, sometimes really disturbing.
And they even had a name for it, right?
And they called it absinthism.
Absinthism.
Sounds serious.
It was serious business.
So was it like the drink itself
Yeah.
or just the whole, bohemian vibe that went with it?
That is the question, isn't it?
$1 million
It
question.
really is. Some people thought it was a compound in the wormwood called thujone.
Okay.
They thought that's what was causing these crazy experiences.
Right. Others were like, nah, it's just all the booze. Or,
Oh.
they made it cheap back then. Probably some bad stuff in there.
Makes you wonder, though, those artists, writers, were they tapping into something like different because of those hallucinations? Or was it just straight up intoxication,
That is the question.
Should be. Makes you think about where inspiration even comes from.
It really makes you question everything.
For real. And speaking of weird perceptions, there's this term, eropsia.
Oh.
It's in our dictionary here.
Yeah.
And it means, get this, seeing the air.
Whoa.
What does that even look like?
All right. So imagine, right, like you're looking around,
Mm,
but there's these like tiny sparkly things everywhere.
okay.
Like visual static filling the air.
Okay, so that sounds a lot like this conditioned visual snow,
Yeah.
where people see that staticky stuff all the time. So was eropsia like the old-timey way of saying visual snow, maybe?
It's possible, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's like how we name these things, totally changes how we see them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It's like that whole thing with like losing feeling in your body.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Our dictionary calls it a co-anesthesia.
Yeah.
Big word. But it means like not feeling that common sensation.
You have common sense.
What even is that? You mean like
Right.
feeling your own body?
Exactly.
Okay, weird.
So like that unsettling thing where your body or part of it feels like gone.
Whoa.
But over time, they came up with a better term, asamatognosia,
Same thing, different name. Why is that a big deal?
because it shows how we're always learning, right?
Yeah.
Our understanding of this stuff, it gets more detailed.
Right.
Like going from a hand-drawn map
Mm.
to using Google Maps, way more precise.
Okay, I get it. Even just a new word can show us a totally new way of thinking about something.
Right.
This is blowing my mind already, and we're just getting started.
Oh, yeah, we're just scratching the surface.
Whoa.
There's this other term, too, algohallucinosis.
Algo what now?
Algohallucinosis. And this one, it connects to this really interesting thing, phantom limb pain.
Oh, I've heard of that. But how's that even possible? To feel pain in an arm or a leg that's not even there.
It's a question that's puzzled people for, forever.
Right.
And that's where this algohallucinosis comes in.
Okay.
It's saying that this phantom limb pain, it's like a hallucination.
Really?
Yeah.
So the pain's real, but it's all in your head, not the missing part.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's like the brain, even though the limb's not there, it's so used to it, it keeps making those sensations.
Wow. So even without anything actually touching you, your brain can just be like, nope, you're feeling this.
Pretty much. It shows how powerful the brain is, right? How it can, create stuff.
That's both amazing and kind of creepy.
Isn't it?
It's like our brain has a mind of its own sometimes.
It kind of does.
Mhm.
And this whole idea of the brain making its own reality, well, that leads us to another thing from the dictionary, Alice in Wonderland syndrome.
Oh, okay. That one I've at least heard of. Okay.
What was it? Something about size being messed up?
Exactly. Like, you ever feel like you shrunk down like a tiny dog?
Okay.
Or like everything around you is suddenly gigantic.
Well,
That's Alice in Wonderland syndrome.
it's literally like being in the story.
Right.
So what is it? Like a brain glitch? Psychological? Something else entirely?
And honestly, it's still a bit of a mystery.
Figures.
Right. But we know it can happen with migraines, epilepsy, even infections,
Wow.
or certain medications.
So many different things can cause it.
Lots of potential triggers.
But it makes sense, though.
Right.
Size and scale, that's like fundamental stuff.
Totally.
No wonder if it gets messed with, it's going to be by something complex.
And your brain is taking in all this information all the time. It's bound to get some signals crossed.
Yeah, I guess that's how you get these crazy distortions.
Exactly.
So we've got this dictionary, tons of wild examples.
Right.
But we got to remember, hallucinations, they're not always just like curiosity cabinet material.
That's right. They can be really tough on people, especially if they're like constant disruptive or part of a bigger health issue.
Absolutely. We never want to downplay the very real challenges people face
Right.
when these experiences become overwhelming. You
Of
know?
course.
It can really impact someone's life.
Totally. And that's why figuring out what's causing them is so important.
Exactly.
So, like, what does that look like? How do you even start to tackle that?
Well, first you got to figure out the root cause.
Makes sense.
If it's medical, like epilepsy, brain injury, well, you treat that first.
Go to the source. Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, if it's tied to mental health, therapy can help a lot.
Right.
Medication, too, managing those experiences.
To live a better life.
Exactly. Yeah.
So treat the cause, you treat the hallucination.
A lot of times, yeah.
But what about when it's not so clear-cut? Like drugs.
That's where it gets really tricky.
Right. Because we know some substances, fun ones, pharmaceutical ones, they can trigger this stuff.
Right.
And it doesn't always stop when the drug wears off either.
Right. That's the scary part.
It's like flashbacks some people get after psychedelics. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like your brain, even from a short exposure, it can get changed.
Whoa.
It's amazing how adaptable it is, but also scary.
Powerful stuff. This whole conversation, it's like I'm seeing the brain totally differently now.
Isn't it incredible?
It can do so much, but it's also kind of fragile.
It's true. The brain is amazing.
Right.
Probably the most complex thing we know of.
Totally.
And figuring it all out, that's the biggest challenge, right?
Right.
Especially how it creates consciousness, how we perceive the world.
And this is where I got to ask, right? Knowing how our brains can cook up these intense experiences with like zero outside input,
Yeah.
doesn't that freak you out a little?
It makes me more curious, honestly.
Really?
Yeah, think about it, the potential. But it also makes you question everything.
Right.
Like what's real out there and what's just our brains making stuff up.
That's a big question.
Big questions. Deep.
Deep stuff.
But before we spiral into an existential crisis,
Right.
let's come back to some of the concrete examples we talked about.
Yeah. Good idea.
Absinthe, phantom limbs, Alice in Wonderland, the whole shebang.
It's a lot to process, isn't it?
Seriously.
It's fascinating stuff.
And this is just scratching the surface. Our dictionary here, it's got tons more.
Yeah, we haven't even gotten to the good part.
Whoa. Like what? Give me a teaser.
Well, have you ever heard of Charles Bonnet syndrome?
Charles Bonnet. Maybe. Refresh my memory.
Okay, so imagine this. You're losing your sight, right?
Okay, yeah.
But then you start seeing things.
Like hallucinations.
Vivid ones, really detailed. People, animals, crazy patterns, whole scenes even.
Whoa. Wait, so even though they're going blind, their brain's like, here's some extra stuff to see.
It's wild,
And
right?
it's kind of cruel, isn't it?
It can be pretty distressing, yeah.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. A lot of people with Charles Bonnet syndrome, they know it's not real.
Yeah, they get that their brain's making it up.
That's some next level self-awareness.
Right.
So even though they're hallucinating, they're not like detached from reality. Right?
Exactly. It's a key difference.
Interesting.
Because it shows hallucinations. They don't always mean something's wrong mentally.
Right.
Sometimes it's totally neurological.
Huh.
Like with Charles Bonnet, it seems the brain, since it's not getting normal visual input, it starts making its own.
Wow, the brain is so weird.
There really is something else.
But kind of cool, too. It's like always adapting, trying to make sense of everything.
It never stops.
Yeah.
Even when the information's incomplete or even totally made up, It's trying to create a whole picture.
And that's how we end up with things like, what was it called?
Like what?
Metamorphopsia.
Oh, metamorphopsia. Yeah, that's a good one.
I'm picturing like a wavy, distorted funhouse mirror.
That's not a bad way to think about it.
Yeah.
It's basically where shapes and sizes get all messed up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So not just things changing size like with Alice in Wonderland, but actually like morphing.
Exactly.
That must be so disorienting.
It can be really unsettling, especially when it happens to faces or things you see all the time.
Yikes. I can imagine.
And the causes, they're all over the place too.
Oh, no surprise there. It's always something complicated with the brain, right?
Migraines, eye problems, neurological stuff, even medications.
Figures.
It goes to show things are rarely simple when it comes to the brain.
Never a dull moment.
Never.
But, okay, we're getting a little off track here.
Oh, are we?
Back to hallucinations. Because there's one more thing from our dictionary that I got to bring up. Hypnagogic hallucinations.
Ah, yes. Those are interesting ones.
What are those again?
Okay, you know those times when you're, like, drifting off to sleep? You're not quite out, but you're not really in either?
Yeah. Like that in-between zone.
Exactly. And then you might see things, hear stuff, even feel sensations that seem totally real.
Oh, yeah. I get those sometimes. It's like, my brain's already dreaming before I'm fully asleep.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
So it's like pre-dreaming.
Basically. As you're falling asleep, your brainwaves slow down.
Okay.
You become less aware.
That makes sense.
But during this transition, certain parts of the brain get more active,
Huh. Interesting.
including the parts that handle your senses and dreaming.
So it's like our brain's throwing a going-away party for our consciousness.
You could say that. And these hypnagogic hallucinations, they can be, like, super normal or totally bizarre.
Right. Like, what kind of stuff?
Some folks see flashes of light, geometric shapes.
Okay.
Others hear voices, their name being called,
Whoa.
or even the feeling of falling.
Yeah, the falling one. That's happened to me.
It's super common.
It's so real. It usually wakes me right up.
Yeah, it's super jarring. It shows how connected our senses and our movements are.
Right.
Even in that hypnagogic state, your brain's still trying to figure out what's going on.
Wow.
Even if the signals are coming from inside your head, not the outside world.
So much is happening that we're not even aware of. It's like our brain's running a whole simulation,
Right.
and we're just like along for the ride.
That's a great way to think about it.
It's only when things glitch out that we
Yeah.
notice.
Exactly.
This is blowing my mind. So we think we're in control, but really it's all our brains.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Totally. And that's just our senses.
Right.
What about all the other ways we experience the world?
Exactly. We're just scratching the surface here.
Oh man, this is deep.
We like to think we've got reality figured out.
Right.
But these hallucinations, illusions, they remind us that it's not so simple.
It's all in our heads.
It really is.
Yeah.
What we see, it's all a product of our own minds.
That's both fascinating and kind of unsettling.
It is. It's like, are we ever really seeing the world as it truly is?
Right. And I think that's an important thing to remember, especially when we meet people whose version of reality might be different from ours.
Absolutely. It's about empathy, understanding. We're all just trying to navigate this thing called reality through the lens of our own brains.
Well said. And with that mind-blowing thought, we're going to take a quick break.
Okay, sounds good.
But don't go too far. We've got more to explore in the world of hallucinations when we get back.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're knee-deep in the world of hallucinations, guided by this vintage German dictionary we've got.
It's a treasure trove, I tell you.
Total treasure trove.
Oh.
So before the break, we were talking about Charles Bonnet syndrome, where people with vision loss see things.
Yeah. Pretty wild stuff. Their brains basically start creating their own visual reality.
It's like their brain saying, fine, you took away the real world, I'll make my own.
Something like that. It shows how adaptable the brain is, even when dealing with something as fundamental as vision loss.
Makes you wonder, what other sensory shenanigans is our brain capable of, right?
Oh, you have no idea. But speaking of sensory shenanigans, there was another term in this dictionary that really caught my eye. Formication.
Formication, huh? Doesn't ring a bell.
It's a creepy one. Imagine this. You get this feeling like bugs crawling all over your skin, but there's nothing there. Ugh. Okay, that's just not right. I'm itchy just thinking about it.
It's a very unsettling sensation, and it often goes hand in hand with conditions like Parkinson's disease or neuropathy, where the nerves are affected.
So the nerves get damaged, they send weird signals to the brain, and the brain's like, yep, those are definitely bugs.
Pretty much. It just goes to show how easily our sense of touch can be tricked. And it's not just touch either. Remember, we were just talking about visual hallucinations with Charles Bonnet syndrome.
Right, right. But this formication thing, that's like next level unsettling. It makes phantom limb pain almost sound pleasant in comparison.
Well, they're not entirely unrelated.
Oh, how so?
Both algohallucinosis, that phantom limb pain, and this formication thing, they're both examples of the brain misinterpreting signals. In one case, it's clinging to the memory of a missing limb. In the other, it's misreading sensations from the skin.
So it's like our brains are working overtime trying to make sense of things, even when the information they're getting is totally out of whack.
Exactly. Our brains crave coherence. They want to create a seamless story, even if it means bending reality a little.
Or a lot. Which reminds me, we got to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, those hallucinations that happen right before you fall asleep. What were they called again?
Hypnagogic hallucination.
Hypnagogic, that's the one.
They're those weird, almost dreamlike experiences that pop up as you're drifting off. Like seeing shapes, hearing snippets of voices, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, those happen to me all the time. Especially the feeling of falling. It's like my brain throws me off a cliff right before I fall asleep.
That's a classic one. It's amazing how vivid those hypnagogic hallucinations can be, even though you're not fully asleep yet.
And it's not just visual, right? There's auditory stuff too.
Exactly. It's like your brain is testing out all its sensory channels, getting ready for the main event, dreaming.
It's like a pre-show for our dreams.
Exactly. Your brain waves are slowing down, your conscious mind is starting to check out, but parts of your brain are still wide awake, playing with all these different sensory experiences.
So those weird, almost dreams we get right before sleep, those are totally normal.
For the most part, yeah. It's just another example of how complex and fascinating the human brain is. We're only just beginning to understand all the crazy things it's capable of.
Speaking of crazy things the brain does, I gotta ask, what about hallucinations that aren't visual or auditory? We've talked a lot about seeing and hearing things, but what about the other senses?
That's a great question. Because, of course, we experience the world through all our senses, not just sight and sound. And just like those senses can be tricked or misinterpreted, they can also be the source of hallucinations.
Wait, so you mean there are, like, smell hallucinations and taste hallucinations?
Exactly. They're not as common as visual or auditory hallucinations, but they definitely happen. For example, someone might smell something burning or taste something metallic, even though there's nothing actually there.
That's wild. I never even considered that. But it makes sense when you think about it. Our brains are wired to create these rich sensory experiences, drawing on all sorts of memories and associations.
Exactly. And when those connections get crossed, or when the brain starts filling in the gaps with its own interpretations, that's when things can get really interesting and sometimes a little unsettling.
Definitely unsettling. This whole conversation has me questioning everything I thought I knew about how my senses work.
And we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
There's so much more to explore when it comes to the brain, perception, and the nature of reality itself.
I'm ready for more, but first, we need to take a quick break. We'll be back with more from the fascinating world of hallucinations right after this. And we're back. Diving deeper into this wild world of hallucinations.
We've barely scratched the surface.
Seriously, though, before the break, we were talking about all these weird sensory mix-ups.
Oh yeah, the brain playing tricks.
Like taste hallucinations, smell hallucinations. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that.
It's wild, right? But it shows how powerful the brain is.
For sure. Creating entire experiences out of thin air, or thin senses, I guess.
Exactly. It's all about how the brain connects different senses, different memories.
Right. Like you smell something, it triggers a memory, suddenly you're back at your grandma's house.
Exactly. But imagine those connections getting crossed, or your brain filling in the blanks with something totally off.
That's when you get those weird phantom smells, phantom tastes.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that our senses aren't always reliable.
No kidding. It's like, what if everything we experience is just our brain's best guess?
That's a big question. And it's something that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries.
No wonder my brain feels a little fried right now. This is heavy stuff.
It's a lot to process. But it's all part of the fun, right? Getting our minds blown wide open by these weird, wonderful quirks of perception.
Totally. It's like, yeah, it's a little unsettling to think about how much our brains are making stuff up.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of cool. Like, we're all walking around with these supercomputers in our heads, creating our own realities.
And those realities, they're shaped by everything we experience.
Right. Our memories, our emotions, our beliefs, the whole shebang.
It's what makes each of us unique.
And it's a good reminder to be open-minded, right? because what I experience might be totally different from what you experience.
Absolutely. Empathy and understanding are key. We're all just trying to navigate this crazy thing called reality, each in our own way.
Well said. And on that note, we've got to wrap up this deep dive into the world of hallucinations.
It's been a wild ride.
Totally. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, stay curious.